Sophia. Yeah.
Here we go. Well, good day. I learned that's the best greeting to do at noon today. So, good day to all of you, and welcome back to our fall session of Interfaith Explorations. This is our fifth class of this session, and we will be meeting till November 17th and then reconvene in January. My name is Sophia Said. I'm your host, I'm your moderator, and also the executive director of the Interfaith Center. Interfaith Explorations is one of our wonderful programs which has been going on for almost 2 years now. Along with me is Dr. J. McDaniel, who is our teacher for this program. Here are you, Jay. Jay serves on the board of Cobb Institute in California. The Cobb Institute, named in the honor of John Cobb, promotes a process and relational worldview to advance wisdom, harmony, and common good. The classes are recorded, and you have access to the recordings if you request them anytime via email. So, a little bit about this class. We are using this book called The World's Wisdom, which is sacred texts from various world religions. It's edited by Philip Novak. And each week, Jay and I, we choose different texts from this book, from the various chapters for group discussions. And we send you page numbers or the link to the page numbers in advance. And the way we are using these texts is very much like the poems that I have used a lot. And we hope that these texts, just like my poems, will spur your imagination and provide food for thought. We have talked about Islam, Judaism, and Taoism in the last few sessions. Today we are starting on Hinduism. But before we start reading, I'm going to ask Jay to give us a brief introduction on Hinduism. I have had a lot of exposure and experience with Hinduism through my Hindu friends. I have never read Hindu texts before, but we have a huge number of Hindu friends, and for the last several decades. And one thing I realized is that although it's a beautiful and a very diverse and pluralistic religion, that's my best word for Hinduism, the way it enhances pluralism, it's like no other religion, but it's also a little complex to understand if you're not exposed to it before. So I'm going to ask Jay to give us an introduction to Hinduism 101 before we do our readings. So here
I
you
will.
go.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And tell me, if I hold this, no, you can't see the book. I used to use a book called The World's Religions by a man named Houston Smith, and it was used all over the country for a long, long time to introduce people to the world's religions. And the first chapter is on Hinduism. And the author found that Hinduism, in his view, was kind of the best opening to all the world's religions because Hinduism includes so much. You can find something of every religion in Hinduism. But it is very confusing, and actually for very good reasons. Hinduism has no single founder. It has no central organization. It has, even the word Hindu was imported and was not natural to Indians. It was imported from the West and then incorporated by Indians. And so some people describe Hinduism more as an ethos or an attitude or an approach to life, certainly than as a set of beliefs. But there are some shared beliefs in Hinduism, and they're fairly easy to understand. One is that the truth is one and the paths are many. That we're all on a journey. Imagine that we're mountain climbers trying to get to the top of a mountain. And the religions are the equipment that we have to get to the top of the mountain. And there's Jewish equipment and Muslim equipment and Christian equipment. But if you're trying to climb a mountain, you would not argue with the person next to you about equipment. You're doing your best to use whatever equipment you have. And so that's a kind of Hindu assumption that there's truth in all the religions. And Hindus believe that the ultimate goal of all religions is the same. I myself don't believe that, but I want to present a kind of Hindu perspective because I understand its beauty. So what is the goal? What are we all looking for? And the Hindus said, well, we're looking for something like peace, inner peace. And we're looking for something like deep wisdom. And we're looking for something like joy. We're all looking for that. And Hinduism offers the further suggestion that those qualities are always already inside us. And so even as we might be looking outside us to find peace, joy, and wisdom, truth be told, they're also already within us in our deepest self. And the term that Hindus use to name that deep self is Atman, Atman. And their proposal is that our Atman, our true self, our deep self, is also identical with the ultimate reality, with God. So the beyond that is more than us, the source of it all, God, is also our deep self, Atman. And the name of the game is to awaken to that fact. To awaken to the fact that, by the way, the Hindu name for the ultimate, for Atman, for the ultimate reality, isn't God, that's a Western word. The Hindu word is Brahman, B-R-A-H-M-A-N. And it's related to the word breathing, actually. So think of the ultimate reality as a kind of cosmic breathing. And think of that breathing as your own breathing at its deepest level. Now, if you ask the question, how might I find that awakening? How might that happen to me? This is where Hinduism becomes very interesting. It says you need to find the path that's right for you. And in general, there are 4 different paths. And these are all classical traditions in Hinduism. First, there's the path for what you might call the philosophers. It's a way of knowing, a way of wisdom. It's not a way of personal piety or devotion to gods or goddesses. It's a way of wisdom. And there are ways to, you might even say, reflect, to think your way into an awareness of the deep self. And then there's some people who would say, I'm not a philosopher. I'm a doer. I'm active. I'm most at home when I'm active in the world. And the Hindu says, well, there's a way for you too. It's the way of action in the world. Now, to act in the world, though, it's important not to be attached to the consequences, not to be obsessed with results. But of course, you act to do good. You act to help to heal a broken world. And your way is the way of action. Now, probably the most famous Hindu of the 20th century, Mahatma Gandhi, that he would say that was my path. It has a technical name. It's called karma yoga. The first one has a technical name too. It's called jnana yoga, J-N-A-N-A. So wisdom yoga, action yoga, karma yoga. For a very few people, there's a third path. I say few just because very few go with this, but they can. It's actually a way of experimentation with the body. Bodily exercises conjoined with being a good person. And this is where we get the traditions of yoga from the Indian subcontinent. things you can do with your body, bodily exercises, that when conjoined with a moral life can be a path to that union. That's called Raja Yoga, R-A-J-A. But the fourth path, and this is the one that we want to talk about, is called Bhakti Yoga. By the way, yoga means way here, Bhakti way. And Bhakti is spelled B-H-A-K-T-I, Bhakti. And this is the way of devotion to a god or a goddess or a multiplicity of gods and goddesses. And this is for people whose path involves a kind of heartfelt connection with others. And the gods and the goddesses are part of that holistic way of living that can yield that heartfelt connection. In India today, there's two major bhakti traditions. One is devoted to the god Shiva. It's called Shaivism. And one is Shaivism, and one is devoted to the god Vishnu. But the gods are not jealous. They don't compete with one another. And you would choose the particular image that's right for you. And there are plenty of female images. There's Durga, who's a mother goddess. By the way, there's Ganga. The Ganges River is a goddess. And there's also I'm joking here, but I think I'm kind of right here too. There's the first feminist, Kali. And Kali is an independent soul. She breaks purity codes right and left. She dances in graveyards, which are supposed to be polluted. She's her own woman, and she is ferocious. She has a tongue hanging out with blood dripping from the tongue. In one hand is a sword or a cleaver. And then in the other hand is her outreached hand saying, "Come unto me. I bring you peace." And Western people can wonder, how could you worship Kali? But our friend, the pioneer of the pluralism project at Harvard, Diana Eck, she was a specialist in Hinduism. And she tells the story of learning about Kali and wondering about Kali. She spent a lot of time in India. She tells the story of her brother dying. His name was Laurie. He died a brutal death in Mexico. And she tells the story of going to get her brother's body in Mexico. She went with her mother. And it took all the courage she could find to walk into that morgue in Mexico and see his brutalized body and claim it. And she says that in one hand, she's a Christian, I had the Book of Common Prayer. I needed that. But she said in her mind, she also had a thought: trust the mother. Trust the mother. She can handle death. And she was thinking about Kali and how Kali gives courage and strength and power. So the Bhakti path, that fourth path, that's the most common one in India. And there's some great jnana wisdom, some great philosophical wisdom, and we're going to go over some of it in our time together on Hinduism. I think we're going to have 2 sessions. But I think Sophia and I agree we'd kind of like to begin with the fourth path and more specifically with a practice that's so common in Indian culture. It's called puja, P-U-J-A. And so our next step is to watch a short video on puja produced by the Harvard Pluralism Project.
Let me pull it up, Jay. Let's see. Um, can you all see my screen, or are you still seeing Jay as spotlighted?
See your screen.
Okay, perfect.
To also do some things, action part.
Okay. Here we go.
Puja is the prayer. Prayer is not just the thought part of it. You also do some things, action. Puja is the prayer. Prayer is not just the thought part of it. You also do some things, action part of it. For instance, if I did a puja at home, first of all, if you don't have a shrine in your home, then you set up one for that day. Most people will have at least a little corner of a room where they have hung some pictures. So if you don't have a whole room dedicated as a shrine, you at least have a little part of a room. You call that your shrine. You have some of your favorite deity pictures there.
Puja gives discipline. If you do puja daily, you're thinking of the deity every day. It makes you think of God.
The puja itself is lighting a lamp, telling your prayers, offering fresh flowers, incense. Then we always ring a little melodious bell. It's very musical. It is kind of stimulating various senses, I feel. There is the fragrance of the flowers, the sound, the incense, the chanting you hear, you sing, the light, it's a feast for your eyes. So it's offering various things to your senses and trying to help your thoughts to a higher plane. That's what a prayer is. According to the Hindu religion, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to set a day aside as a holy day. Every day is holy.
I think next what I would like is for Sophia to describe just some of her own experiences with puja among Indian friends and what you made of it. Would you do so, Sophia?
Yeah, definitely. Don't we want to do the reading first, Jay?
Oh, I there's no reading to my knowledge on puja that we have. So I think for the moment, let's go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead to puja. Yeah.
Okay, so well, I don't know the theology behind puja, but I have experienced a lot of pujas along with my friends who would invite me to their homes to be a part of the service. So for me, puja is very much like a worship service. Like a Muslim would go to a special place, a Muslim like me, and put a prayer mat and prepare for the prayer and then move into the prayer for me, which is a very devotional time to be with my God. So puja was very much like that for me. The things that I noticed is you can go to a temple and do puja with the community, or you can go to your Hindu friend's home and do puja with them in the corner of a room in their house. And the experience itself is extremely devotional. There is no um, structure or rhythm to it. It depends on the person who's leading the puja, but it's also very sensual. You get to see the different pictures or statues of the deity which that person who's leading the puja is important to them. You hear the musical chants that they are doing. You smell the incense which my friends would always burn and light at the time of puja, and the small oil lamps. So it's like you're you're reading, reciting, listening, sensing, smelling, also touching. There are flowers involved. There is food that you offer to the deities. So it's a very multi-sensual experience and extremely devotional time for the Hindus. And to me, honestly, it was just like a worship service that I loved to join and be a part of, and in a very holy time. Also want to add one more thing. I'm a Muslim, and most of the Muslims are very uncomfortable with images and what is it, statues or any kind of shape or form that we give to a god. Actually, most of the Abrahamic faith. So I must say that going to a traditional Hindu puja is not a very comfortable experience for some of my family members because it's very focused on images and statues of God. So that's one thing that those who have not experienced, I would like you to keep in mind. It's a very different experience from any Abrahamic faith worship service.
And Sophia, I'd like to press that even further if I could. So in Hinduism, in this tradition, when you're in the presence of a statue, and let's say it's Ganesha, the elephant god, or let's say it's it's Vishnu, or it's Shiva, or it's Kali, or Durga, the mother goddess, and you look into the eyes of the statue, there's an experience that Hindus have that the goddess is actually looking back at you through that statue. And so where we might want to say, oh, the statue symbolizes the goddess, it points to the goddess who is elsewhere, but it symbolizes her. There's a tradition in Hinduism, it's called darshan. No, the goddess actually, through the ritual, enters into the statue. And her presence is in the statue. So when you are in the presence of the statue, you're actually in the presence of the goddess. Her eyes see you as your eyes see her. It's called darshan, D-A-R-S-H-A-N. And the eye contact plays a very important role. The idea of seeing the goddess, being in the presence of the goddess right there in that moment. Now, Hindus know that eventually the statues can crumble. The goddess can exit the statue and you can throw away the statue. But I was wondering, do you have anything in your experience that's that intimate, or is there something in you which says, no, the material world can point to God, but no, you don't see God? Actually, I think the Abrahamic traditions have really wrestled with that. And I hope you can understand from a Hindu perspective, gee, what kind of God wouldn't want to make herself or himself visible? Isn't that a more generous God, in a way, to make herself visible and to enter into statues and rivers and mountains? And so to me, it's a challenge, a great challenge to Abrahamic sensibilities, but I don't know if I've got any people that feel that challenge. So anyway, let's just open it up. What do you think? Anybody have any thoughts from anything said so far?
Let's go to Lauren.
Excuse me. Hi, everybody. So I think it's very funny how, so I was raised Catholic, and if any of y'all have ever been in a large Catholic church or have been to a Catholic mass, especially on one of our very important religious holidays like Easter, for example, one of my favorite things, I remember a professor in college described the Easter Vigil Mass as lots of lights and bells and smells, which is very correct. So I actually feel very comfortable whenever I would go and participate in puja with some of my friends from college. And, you know, we have a similar thing in Catholicism where we believe that God is present in the Eucharist. We can see and feel and touch God, and we take God into our own bodies. And so I don't know of any other Christian traditions that may necessarily go so far as to believe in the physical presence of God. But I see a lot of parallels between the puja for Hinduism and with the high masses for Catholicism.
Thanks. Anybody else? That's great, Lauren, and I see those parallels too. Anybody else? Or challenges? Deb.
My understanding is that in Judaism, God is present in everything and everywhere, including in us. We can't see God because it is too powerful. The glory of God is too powerful. But in many instances of hearing what is thought to be God's voice, of seeing God's presence, or feeling God's presence, and especially when you have a minyan of 10 men if you're Orthodox, or just 10 Jews if you're not Orthodox, that is specifically to bring the presence of God in. On a woman's wedding day, she is especially in contact with God, and she will give prayers, very personal prayers that she doesn't even know always why she's praying it, to people who come to her one at a time and they leave in tears. I saw this with my daughter. There are many instances in Judaism. And I have a friend in our Sisters of Light group who is Hindu. We have a couple of Hindu Indians, and they talk a lot about just the feeling of comfort and easily getting along, going to each other's worship services among all the religions. I always felt India was the most diverse country in terms of a religious fabric, and how they would go to each other's homes for special meals and for services and have people come into their home. And in her home, she showed us her shrines, her little temples, and I didn't feel uncomfortable with it. It wasn't my religion, it was hers. And I could feel how devoted she was to this. And the idea of calling on different gods for different strengths that you need on your journey, to me was very much like calling on the different attributes of God for me. So it didn't make me uncomfortable, but I could see what you're saying, Sophia. It was very different. Yeah.
Anybody else want to say something or offer a comment on this? Our topic is seeing God in statues, feeling God's presence from the statue itself. Anybody?
I don't know if I can answer you at the level that you asked the question about seeing God in statues, but I kind of want to talk about a revelation sort of that I had when you think about how various faith communities work very hard to say not this, not this, not this, not this. This isn't the ultimate. But there's another approach that says this and this and this, and this is divine. So I like to keep that thought rather than seeing it as a discomfort with statues or images, but the infinite is difficult to point at. And so we do it sometimes by not even saying the name, by evaporating into so much nothingness that the name for the divine is even unutterable. But sometimes we have to explode and say this and this. And so the various forms become the same attempt to name the nameless. And so that's kind of how I'm seeing it today.
I think that's beautiful, Carol. And in Hinduism, the phrase they use for not this, they actually have a phrase, it's neti, N-E-T-I. So they say neti, neti, not this, not this, not this. But in the next breath, just like what you said, this and this and this and this. And I'll tell you two things Diana X says, who I learned so much from. She raises the question, why do Abrahamic traditions have a little bit of problem with the visibility of the divine? And the visibility of the divine, this and this and this and this. And she says it's because the Abrahamic traditions have basically focused on hearing the voice of God, the voice of Allah. We've been a little ear-centered, so we can hear God's call, but we're a little nervous about seeing God in the statue or the mountain. We can do it, but there's a little bit of a tension because we've been ear-based, the call, rather than sight-sensitive. And what happens when you go to India, it's also visible. It's an eye-sensitive tradition. Another thing she says that I found very interesting, she says we're a little nervous about the polytheistic imagination. And she borrows the phrase from James Hillman, the psychologist James Hillman, who says the polytheistic imagination is really at home with manyness, with multiplicity. Multiplicity, manyness. And it's the polytheistic imagination doesn't want to too quickly subsume the many under the one, as if unity always has priority over diversity, or the oneness of God always has priority over the manyness of God. So in the Indian culture, there's been a kind of balance between oneness and manyness, yes to both. Where she says that the Abrahamics have tended to want to put oneness over manyness. All things considered, we want the many to be subsumed under the one. So she recommends the polytheistic imagination for us, who are a little too disposed toward unity at the expense of multiplicity. I'm trying to challenge us all. If I'm failing.
Joyce, you're on Spotlight. You had a comment.
Yes, I'm not a biblical scholar, so I may be getting this all wrong. But I have a vague memory that within the New Testament, there is a saying that wherever two or more are gathered in my name, there too shall I be. So again, it's not about a statue, but it's about presence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and multiple presence, two or more.
I wonder if there has been an evolution. So I can't get my head wrapped around this because of the idea that back in the Torah, where we hear sort of snippets of, say, Rachel having a statue that she stole from her father, and he then accuses her of taking this statue, and we have understood that we've evolved from there, where we were thinking that monotheism had begun, but maybe it was an evolution. It wasn't quite what we think of it now. And so to go backwards to that place, I mean, this is just me in my brain, to go backwards to that place. So we have evolved, and now, I don't know that I could swing back into that idea. And the idea that we can't contain God. And so this statue, this visible something, would show that we were trying to put a label or a container on something that is unavailable in that way. I think those two ideas in my head make it very difficult for me to commune with that idea, and give me problems, I guess.
Hey, Jay, you identified like 4 paths to, I guess, knowledge or whatever. I'm not sure how. I think they may be incompatible, or maybe they're strengths of one that blind you to the strengths of the others. Because I'm kind of action oriented, but I don't give enough credit maybe to the other paths because I'm kind of centric. But are those different paths perceived to be highly compatible, partially compatible, or they're offered because they're not compatible?
Well, I think people will lean in one direction or another, but they'll always meld various paths. So for example, Jerry, growing up an Episcopalian, you're fully familiar with kneeling, with the role that body can play in devotional practice. A Muslim is fully at home with prostrating. If you think about it, that's a kind of yoga. That's a little bit of Raja yoga there in the kneeling and the folding the hands in prayer. Whatever you do, you use your body. And you were taught, I'm sure, that your action should be in service to God, not just your ego. That's a bhakti way. And I know that you're a student, you studied a lot, you think a lot, you reflect a lot. That's a jnana way. So we all meld them, but we may tend to lean in one direction or another.
Thanks.
Ellen, I just want to say those reservations I understand personally. And I think that one of the beauties of interreligious dialogue is not that we find ourselves agreeing, but we find ourselves challenged. And we begin to say, maybe my assumptions are questionable too. Because so we begin to self-relativize a bit. Oh, this is the way I think, but I'm not the only game in town.
That's the beauty of this class, Jay. That's the beauty of this meeting. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Lynn, and then we'll do a reading.
Okay, I'm sorry. Part of this process, if we take the little statues out of the picture, the idea of the smoke and the light and things going up and the spices and that touch all of our sensations, all of our senses, is reminiscent of many things certainly within Judaism. I can't speak to any other thing. And I went to a multi-denominational Eastern religious service that took place here in Little Rock. My daughter was at Hendrix studying comparative religions, and both of us were struck by many of the similarities between those multi-faith practices and what we grew up with, what we were steeped in. So, when I thought about it, I came out thinking to myself, well, I actually felt very comfortable. There was nothing in that service that disturbed me in any way. These little statues were more of a focal point, but they weren't the main. They were not the main part of that service. And when I say it was multi-Eastern religion, it was Hindu and Buddhist and starts with an R. It was a lot of years ago. I can't remember, but it was a community of people that came together one night a week and had this communal service. And of course, there's always food, which is very familiar in the tradition that I grew up in. So anyway, that's all I had to say.
Lynn, one thing I would add to that, and also piggybacking on what Ellen said, it's really hard for people of Abrahamic faith to think about God as being contained in a statue. So
Yeah,
I get what Ellen says, because we are told over and over again God cannot be contained in a space or in a form. And I would talk to my Hindu friends about the role of statues in their homes and worships and lives. But it's important to note what you said. It's just for some of them, if not many of them, statue is more like a focal point.
Right.
It does not represent all of God to them. It's just one of the many aspects of God. And I look at it like that, like, just being a mother is not all of Sophia. I'm also a wife and a friend and a teacher and a leader and a servant. And I mean, there are so many different aspects to my personality, and not one of them is not any one of them is all of Sophia. It's just like that for gods in Hinduism, that not any one of them is all of the divine force and energy, but they all are in it together. So that's what I would get from my friends a lot. Jay, do we want to go to the reading?
Yeah, I just want to say a helpful image for me, at least, maybe for us, is if we talk about the gods and goddesses, pure and simple, they can be understood as like facets of a crystal.
Right.
And so imagine a crystal with a multitude of facets, and think of each god and each goddess as a facet of the crystal. If you do, then on the one hand, it's true that no facet is the whole of the crystal. But it's also true that the crystal is present in each facet. And each facet, in a way, contains the whole of the crystal. In its way. It's kind of like a hologram. If you know about a hologram, it's not just a single image, it's in the larger context of a big picture. The big picture is incarnate and fleshed, embodied in each element. It's not just that the part's part of a larger whole, the whole is in each part. Both of those are true. And so there is a tradition in Hinduism which says each god contains all the gods. Each goddess contains all the deities. And all are facets of that crystal. All right, let's read something.
Okay.
Sophia, you want to read?
Shall we start with this passage, Who Knows, from Rig Veda?
Yeah.
Okay. At first, there was only darkness, wrapped in darkness. All this was only unilluminated water, that one which came to be, enclosed in nothing, arose at last, born of the power of heat. In the beginning, desire descended on it. That was the primal seed born of the mind. The sages who have searched their hearts with wisdom know that which is kin to that which is not. But after all, who knows? And who can say whence it all came and how creation happened? The gods themselves are later than creation. So who knows truly whence it has arisen? Whence all creation had its origin? He, whether he fashioned it or whether he did not. He who surveys it from highest heaven, he knows, or maybe even he doesn't know.
Sophia, let's say a word just about that. The Rig Veda is a very ancient text, 600 BCE, I mean, way back there. And it's one of the sacred texts that particular passage ends with a question. And it leaves it open. And it's kind of like saying, God knows, or maybe even God doesn't know. Okay. Can you think of anything in other sacred texts, including your own, where it leaves it open-ended and says something to the effect, maybe even God doesn't know? By the way, I think the book of Jonah in Hebrew Bible ends with a question. I don't think it's that question, but it's a question. But, you know, a sacred text that leaves you with the question at a deep level. Maybe even God doesn't know. Anybody? Any analogies, parallels?
Ecclesiastes does the same thing, doesn't it, Jay?
That's right. That's right.
A lot of questions and no answers.
That's right.
That's the traditional, like, rabbinical discussion.
The book of Job.
The traditional Jewish study session is you ask a rabbi a question and you get 3 questions. They don't answer with an answer, they answer with a question.
Now, are we able to say maybe even God doesn't know?
I can. I love that passage that you just read. I love that. It makes me want to be Hindu. I love it. I'm not going, but I love it. Yeah, absolutely. We don't know. That's my biggest statement about religion, any religion, is we don't know.
Jay, it's a very interesting and it's a challenging question. Like in Islamic faith, God is all-knowing. And God's knowledge is unlimited, and it's eternal and everlasting, and it's emphasized over and over again that God knows what is and what is not, and what will be and what will not be. So being in an interfaith setting, it's easy to accept and understand and embrace such a different concept, but very, very unusual for a Muslim to deeply internalize, or something that we're used to. No, we're not.
I think it's tough for Christians too. 98% of the images you get from Christianity is that we may not know, but God does.
I think it's also healthy. I mean, in some way. I mean, it's you get on this kind of rhythm of knowing, and you kind of listen to yourself enough that you believe what everything you're saying. So I think in some way it is nice to explore the explore it. I mean, I think it's very healthy.
I would like to note that the Sufi tradition in Islam, as I understand it, has a tradition of holy bewilderment. Holy, holy bewilderment, in the emotion of being bewildered, of not knowing, and knowing that you don't know is itself a form of wisdom. At least that's how I've understood it. Maybe even a way of touching God.
I like that. Yeah.
Now, Sophia, if I'm all wrong about that.
No, you're all right, and that's very connected to Taoism too. And there is safety in embracing the unknown and not knowing, and leaving it to someone else, and it's there. And I love it. I love the fact that we can say, okay, I don't know, and it's okay. It's fine. I don't need to know.
Sophia, can I ask just a little further? Can not knowing be itself a way of being with God?
I would think so. I would think so. I'm okay with not knowing certain things. There are things I know, things I don't know, things I will never know. And much of what I think I know is not correct. So I'm fine with not knowing. That doesn't have anything to do with whether I have faith that there is something that does know more than me.
I think faith after the Holocaust has to include an unknowing. And so that's the challenge, I think, of
how evil exists in the world and the unknowing, even of the unknowable, and holding that tension and still carrying on and still having faith and still working toward redemption and well-being of all beings. So I think it has to be part of the theology, certainly post-Holocaust theology.
Well, let's read one more. Sophia, we have time for, I think, for one more.
Yeah, let's do one more. And as we go towards it, there is also a burden in knowledge. And I can't recall the exact tradition, but when it comes to my tradition, knowledge also brings burden with it. So sometimes not knowing is the best thing. Okay. Which one, Jay, do you want to go to?
Well, I think for now, let's just do the Thou Art That.
Okay, let's do Thou Art That. That's a really short reading. And that's how it goes. There is a light that shines beyond all things on earth, beyond us all, beyond the heavens, beyond the highest, the very highest heavens. There's a light that shines in our heart. Om. Om. Believe me, my son, an invisible and subtle essence is the spirit of the whole universe. That is reality. That is Atma. Thou art that.
I think we can open it up and we can close with that. I would like to share with all of us how to say it in Sanskrit. And maybe you, if you've heard this before and know this, forgive me for that. But the phrase is tat, T-A-T, tvam, T-V-A-M, asi, A-S-I. So tat, tvam, asi. And it means thou art that. And it's really one of the most well-known, beloved phrases that we get from this tradition. Tattvam asi. Thou art that. And the passage that we just read comes from a longer piece where Hinduism is patriarchal. Indian culture has been deeply patriarchal. So sorry for all the examples being sons and daughters, but that's the legacy. That's what we inherit. But it's a father talking to his son, and the father gets a glass of water and pours salt into the water and stirs it, and the salt is dissolved into the water, and you can't see the salt anymore. All you see is the water. And the father says that water is Brahman, and you are the salt, and you're absorbed into the Brahman. Tattvam asi. Thou art that. It's an invitation to claim. If I'm Jewish or Christian or Muslim, I'd say it's to claim the image of God within me. Whatever God isn't just outside me. God's inside me too. Tattvam asi. Tattvam asi. So I bet you all have a lot of that in your traditions. I bet I'm not saying anything that you don't already think or know. Comments, thoughts, additions, questions?
Jay, you want me to go to the next reading, or we want to see?
Well, I'm kind of watching the clock. I think we have about 2 minutes. Is that right? We'll do the last reading. You can read the last reading.
Yeah.
Lynn, did you want to say something?
No, I'd rather hear a reading.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes. Let's do another reading. So this is from Ramakrishna, and it's called The Insanity of Thinking My Religion Alone is True. Mother, 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 everyone foolishly assumes that his clock alone tells correct time. Christians claim to possess exclusive truth. Countless varieties of Hindus insist that their sect, no matter how small and insignificant, expresses the ultimate position. Devout Muslims maintain that Quranic revelation supersedes all others. The entire world is being driven insane by this single phrase, "My religion alone is true." Oh, Mother, you have shown me that no clock is entirely accurate. Only the transcendent sun of knowledge remains on time. Who can make a system from divine mystery? But if any sincere practitioner, within whatever culture or religion, prays and meditates with great devotion and commitment to truth alone, your grace will flood his mind and her heart. Mother, mother, mother. I love this. This is so beautiful. Mother, mother, mother. Everyone foolishly assumes that his clock alone tells correct time. That was a good closing prayer too, but we still have time for comments.
Any thoughts?
I think the notion of the you are that, thou art that, probably lives very deeply in all faith communities, you know, and so from my perspective, when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, when we say the oneness, we include ourselves in that oneness and dissolve into that oneness. So any faith with consciousness, I think, has that. But it's so beautiful to hear as a separate teaching, or in the way that Namaste is that recognition. And maybe we need to say it to each other more, but so that we don't, you know, come to the conclusion that one's clock is better than the other, more accurate. So thanks for the statement that will kind of buzz around, become absorbed in my own awareness.
Thank you, Carol and Sophia. I think we can draw this session to a close. We'll be on Hinduism next week as well.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll use the same passage as our closing prayer. Peace, salam, and shalom to you all.